Happy Pride readers. Welcome to Pride Book Festival. I'm Maya Antonique and I run the account Antonique Reads. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm excited to bring you the panel Writing Across Demographics. This panel will be a craft-oriented panel and it's all about what it's like to write across age demographics and even genres in some cases, which takes a lot of skill and depth of knowledge and craft. So let's meet our panelists.
Hi, I'm author Charlton Trujillo. I'm also a filmmaker and a youth activist. A lot of my work is around empowering young people to see how they can utilize their voice and story. So I try to take the books that I write and convert that into conversation in the real world and how we can allow young people to feel like that their story is relevant now and that they don't have to wait for something, that they can be activists, they can be storytellers, and they can celebrate who they are now. So that's a lot of what I try to do in the world. So that's me.
My name is Eric Duran. I'm an author of children's books primarily, and I am a huge advocate of telling stories that have queer representation and stories that are inclusive. And I feel like that is so important now more than ever.
Hi, I'm Simon James Green, and I write everything from picture books, middle grade, through to YA.
Hi, I'm Michael Saris. I wrote a queer adult novel. No. I'll do it again. Hi, my name is Michael Saris. I am the author of an adult queer novel, and I wrote a picture book called The Golden Boy.
Great. So let's get started with our first question. So all of you have written or are in the process of writing young adult. We also have authors who've written picture books, middle grade, adult fiction, and nonfiction. So can I ask each of you to talk about the books you've written across different demographics? And what are they and what age demographics do they belong to?
Okay, I'll go first. So I began my career in middle grade, and then I moved to YA, and now I'm in picture book. And they're so different from each other, and yet, it's been a really exciting ride. The books that I'm most known for are the Fat Angie series, and which deals a lot with, body image and representation and queerness, and looking at, issues of family and relationship. And so I see that as sort of like threads that go through all of my books in different ways. And really also looking at culture, being someone who is non-binary and, queer and Mexican-American, but moving through the world passing as white. And so there's like a lot of those sort of experiences that I try to translate into the books that I write, whether it's for the youngest people or, those that are, in the YA spectrum. But I have to say that writing for picture book has been somewhat like every word counts, and it should be for novels and as well. It's just, it really focuses on that discipline, and that's been an interesting transition to make in the last 2 years, is to make that shift.
Shall I go? I'll go. Shall I go? I'll go. Yes. All right. I started off writing YA, and I still do, but my debut was this one, Noah Can't Even, and the sequel, Noah Could Never, which I call the banana books for obvious reasons. These are kind of coming out books, really, but told from a very kind of comedic point of view. And then I wrote Alex in Wonderland, which was a kind of first love sort of book. Heartbreak Boys, which is another kind of YA gay boy rom-com, basically. Dumped at prom, go on a road trip. And this one, which has just come out, which is You're the One That I Want, which is set around a high school production of Grease, with people falling in and out of love and so on. So those are kind of the YA rom-com books. And then I wrote, my middle grade book is Life of Riley, Beginner's Luck, which is about a 10-year-old boy who's cursed at a fun fair. And it's really a kind of novel about friendship, really, that book. And it stops slightly short of a first crush on a boy, but it very much does focus on those types of friendships and relationships and how they gently develop at that sort of age. And I've written 2 picture books as well. The first one is Llama Glamorama, which is essentially about a llama that basically goes to Pride and has a great time. And that's out in the UK and in the US now. And then my latest one is Fabulous Frankie, about a flamingo who just wants to be a little bit more fabulous and sort of over the top, and looks at ways he can do that. So yeah, those are my books basically.
I'll go. So I have written everything from picture books to middle grade and young adult. My debut picture book is out August 17th, Poultrygeist. Why did the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side, as in the spirit world. And
I
this
love
book,
it.
Nice.
Thanks. It was so much fun to write. Oh, we're getting some glare. And it's illustrated by Pete Oswald, who is the illustrator of the Bad Seed series and is so incredibly talented. And it has kind of a message of standing up for yourself and being yourself despite who others may want you to be, which to me is a queer theme, at least in my experience. So while the book doesn't have anything explicitly queer, it definitely is queer coded in my opinion. And then for middle grade, I've done a lot of ghostwriting and adapting screenplays to novelizations. So for example, the Descendants junior novel from Disney, it was one of their Disney Channel original movies that I adapted into a book. And I do a lot of work like that. Most of them are ghostwritten, so are kind of top secret in terms of me being able to talk about them. And then lastly, young adult is something I've always written, but I'm having my debut young adult novel come out next summer with Inkyard Press. It's called A Tale of Two Princes. It's about a out and proud cowboy who runs into his long lost twin, who is the closeted crown prince of Canada. And yes, in this book, Canada does have a monarchy, and that comes out again next summer. So I'm kind of getting into these original Eric Duran stories at this point in my life. And I'm leading with queerness, and I'm leading with joy, and trying to have the stories be uplifting. So, yeah.
Okay, I wrote an adult queer novel called All of My Friends Are Rich, and it's about a sort of lost guy in his 30s, and he's finding out that all of his friends have everything sorted out, careers, and they're starting families, while he has no money, and he finds special ways to sort of earn money. And it's also about his struggle with bipolar depression, which is something that I brought to my picture book, The Golden Boy, which is essentially the same story, just a lot lighter and with more colorful images. And my next novel will be a young adult / new adult novel about two boys who fall in love online at the wake of Facebook and Instagram, and it's a story that spans about 10 years. So that's it.
All right, so our next question is, when you started writing, which age demographic and genre did you write? And when did you decide to write for a different age demographic, and why?
Ooh, for me, I started in YA, and that was my sort of natural place. I've always loved kind of those sort of coming of age stories. I love that sort of thing. And then I had lunch with my editor one time, and I was just talking about wanting to do more because I felt like I could write more books than I was sort of currently doing. And it was his suggestion that maybe I try picture books as something to do next. So that's how it started for me. And after I did that and I kind of really enjoyed it, I said, well, would you consider a middle grade as well? So I just kind of offered it up to them really. And happily they agreed that they would publish them, which was great. But yeah, so it just came out of wanting to do more really, mainly because I needed the money, to be honest with you.
I had a very different journey, I think. Literally, I had started in middle grade, as I mentioned before, but I had really no intention of writing books. I was dared actually to write this book, and so I wrote it on a dare. I was a filmmaker at the time, and I wrote on a dare, and I cracked it out in 2 months, and entered it in the Delacorte Del Yearling Award, the Random House, and I won. And they literally called me on the phone, and I'm like in the middle of snowy Madison, like snowy Wisconsin, in a laundromat, and I literally thought it was the student loan people calling, and they were wanting money from me. So I was very aggressive at first, like, who are you and what do you want? Come to find out, they actually wanted to pay me money for a book, and I had no sense of what that meant. And so my entry into writing for children was literally something I kind of stumbled into, but then really found a place where I had a lot to say. I just didn't realize that that's where I wanted to go. And so transitioning from middle grade, people often talk about like, well, why do you choose that? And sometimes I think the story chooses you. I mean, yeah, we make a living, hopefully, for the most part, doing this work, but the story chooses you. And so I think I was at a place where I could start moving into YA. And then I think then the time came when I was ready to move into picture books, but to go back and forth between them. And I just think it was just really about trying to tell stories that were entertaining, but also that I felt were also about the culture and the world that I grew up in. And, when I wrote Fat Angie, before I won the Stonewall, when I wrote that book and it came out, there was no dumpling. Julie Murphy wasn't writing then, in the sense that she didn't have the prolific space she has now. And so it was one of those unusual fat girl books who happens to be a girl who is gay. And, at that time when it came out, I was really afraid to be writing a book about queerness, because I was like, well, I'm from Texas originally. I mean, who's going to put a book about a fat gay girl in a Texas library? And then it was like amazing that librarians started doing it. And then they gave me an award on top. And I'm like, wait, what? This is like magical. It's like unicorns just dropped from the heavens. And so, anyway, that was sort of like my transition to the work that I did.
I started off writing young adult. I think it was because a part of me thought that to tell queer stories with queer characters, or characters who are queer and the story not being queer. Anyways, queer stories felt like only young adult could be queer. In my mind, I had kind of canceled out middle grade and picture books as having the possibility to infuse those stories with queerness. But in the like years following those young adult manuscripts that I wrote, I began to realize that it was just as important to have queer representation in picture books and middle grade novels and young adult for different reasons. And it really was important for me to kind of have that click. And once that did, I started to write picture books in middle grade and bring myself into it where I felt I couldn't before. So that was kind of a learning for me.
I started writing my novel at a time where I was really struggling with my mental health. I was in a very, very dark place and I didn't really know what to do. I was off work and I sort of just grabbed my laptop and started, I started going with what my life was and how I was feeling at that moment. And, I started tapping. And I knew I didn't want to write a story about coming out because, a little bit privileged, but coming out was the least of my problems growing up. It was never an issue. I never had to come out to my parents. It was very smooth. But once I hit 29 and, I wasn't in the career path that I wanted, and I saw all of my friends having success and enjoying life. And that was the moment I wrote a novel about the discomfort of, growing up and having, money problems and find it hard to connect with people and not having much success with relationships. And that's where my first novel comes from. And it was also the way that I I went through my bipolar depression, I started, when I started writing the book, I just started medication. And by the time I finished the book, the medication had actually kicked in. So it was a whole process. And then after that, I knew I wanted to write something a little bit younger, which is the next novel that I'm writing, a bit young adult / new adult. And still, I think I really enjoy writing about mental health and internal struggles, and that's what I sort of write in each of my stories. And that's the same thing I did with my picture book. I wanted to sort of explain what bipolar is in a way that is easily readable by children, with colorful images, with magic and all the nerd stuff that I love. And that was sort of my goal.
Thank you. So our next question is story or age demographic, which comes first? What is the decision-making process for deciding what you want to write? Does the story come first, or does the desire to write for a different age demographic? How do you consider your audience for any given story?
I think, Simon, go ahead.
No. I was just thinking, you please.
Okay. For me, the story comes first, and it tells me what it wants to be. So I love that process for myself because, for instance, I have a picture book manuscript right now that is horror. And I was like, this is dark. This should be young adult. And the story was like, nope, picture book. So that's just kind of the path I'm following right now, and I'm loving it.
Yeah, I have to say I'm pretty much the same actually, Eric. And picking up something that you mentioned, E, earlier, that's the idea of the story kind of choosing you. I think that's very much what happens to me as well. I think these ideas just sort of arrive, or maybe a character, or it's just a particular premise or idea, and it just sort of, it feels right in one particular area. And I don't think it's anything that I do to sort of force it one way or the other. It just kind of is. And some things just are a picture book, and other things are just more naturally YA, I guess, or middle grade, as the case may be. But I think, yeah, I do find they sort of choose you, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm with both of them. I mean, for me, I think it would be too much in my head if I'm thinking, well, this needs to fit an age range of like ages 3 to 5 or 6. And I mean, that's what marketing is going to do, and that's what editorial is going to do. They're going to come in and give me that guidance. When I sit down, I'm telling the story, and of course, there's a sense like when Eric's saying horror and picture book, right? It's like you're like, whoa, that is way too much. But then, is it? We don't know until we put it there, until we work through it, and then obviously once you're in editorial, then you can decide, well, what part of this might be too much, or what am I willing to sacrifice? And so, but I think ultimately it really is about the story, and I would be really curious to hear the other authors say, but for me, sometimes I can literally be in a restaurant. It's a line of dialogue someone says, music on the radio, an image on Instagram. The stories that they come from everywhere. And of course, there's the things that I'm really passionate or pissed off about, and those things, then become part of that narrative and deciding how these characters play out. But I'm not, if I start thinking in the realm of this has to fit in this box, I tend to fail. I need to just let it be what it's going to be, and then move on from there. So,
yeah, and I'm exactly the same. I think for me, characters usually come first, and maybe like a little setting, and then once I start putting those pieces together, that's usually when the story takes form, and I usually can gauge whether it's going to be adult or new adult, or it all depends on the characters, really, for me.
Well, that's really cool to hear, actually. So kind of switching a little bit to talk about the publishing industry, do you think there are any advantages to writing in one age demographic over the other? And whether that's the ease of storytelling or monetary, is one age or genre more advantageous than the others for you, and why?
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first again.
Go on, Eric. Come on.
Okay. I think that they're all a lot of work, first and foremost. A lot of people will say, oh, a picture book. I could write a picture book in my sleep.
Yeah.
That must not be a lot of work compared to a young adult novel, which is many words and many pages. I personally think it's all a lot of work. I also think that there are advantages, though, to writing across different demographics because each reader is going to take something away. So whether it's a child being read a picture book that might stay with them for years to come, that they're telling their family about one day, a middle grade reader learning about coming out, and it's kind of giving them some insight into themselves as they grow and develop, or a young adult where, it's kind of a nice look at who a reader could be or how they could live their lives or have their own happy ending. So I feel like there are so many great advantages to each demographic in terms of how it can touch and affect the reader. But yeah, they're all a lot of work to write.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think.
Sorry, Michael, go on.
Oh, I think for a writer, I think starting out is not better, but is preferable to like stick within one age demographic genre until you sort of establish, hopefully, a fan base. Obviously, ultimately, your agent, their contacts, and your publisher sort of all come into play and decide how you're sold and marketed. But I think it's a little bit easier to sort of move across genres and age demographics once your name is already out there. But obviously there are a lot of positives with crossing genres because you establish yourself as a versatile writer, and as Eric said, you reach more people. So there's lots of good on both.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to add just a kind of a slightly UK perspective here, which is the kind of the middle grade and picture book markets in the UK are both quite a lot bigger than the YA markets are. So just in terms of kind of not that I'm obsessed with money or anything or sales, but which it now sounds like I am. It's the second time I've mentioned it already. But the middle grade market is bigger, and I think for YA over here in the UK, sometimes the UK authors can struggle a little bit because we get a lot of the US stuff over here, sort of published by UK publishers, and it arrives with quite a substantial amount more buzz than a lot of the UK has due to the size of the US. So books that have already been a huge hit, for example, in the States, then sort of arrive over here with quite a lot of fanfare. And it can be quite hard, I think, in the UK to kind of make much inroad into the YA market. Also over here, we're like completely in love with the American high school experience. We seem to love it in everything that we want to read and watch. Even if it's not necessary, I don't know how realistic it even is, but it's adored really. So anything like that has a sort of glamour and sheen attached to it almost, which also kind of really appeals and helps those US YA authors a little bit more, I think. So I just wanted to add that kind of that UK angle to it, because I think the YA stuff can sometimes struggle over here a little bit for that reason.
The only thing that would for me in this question is that starting at middle grade, moving to YA now, doing picture books as well, is it, like I had said at the beginning, something I'm really excited about is I get to work with young people. Like for me, the book is a transition into activism. It's a transition into empowering young people around storytelling. And so the thing that got me so excited about moving into picture book was the idea that now I can work with a whole different demographic of young people and to talk about, themes with young people that I want to talk about and I want to engage with them. And it's a completely different, environment, but at the same time, it's so exciting because, when you're sitting with 5 and 7 year olds, their excitement for story is unbelievable. Now, granted, the attention span's so different too, right? Yeah. But there's such an excitement about working with young people. And I think for me, again, that idea that when you can write across genres, is it, we can talk about financials and how things are marketed and what sells and what doesn't sell and this and that. But when you get down, if part of your work really is about the reader, right? The reader, the young person, then you think about, kind of like what Eric said, if they can carry these stories with them at these different age levels all the way through. When you're really young, when you say, what was your favorite book? A lot of young people remember those first books, and they take that with them. And I think that's what's so exciting is when you write across, is you get to be part of you might be part of someone's life, you know, all through those main years, all the way through till they're 18 or sometimes older. And I love that. Like, to me, that is like the magic. That is the absolute gift. And so I think that's what I love so much about this, is it really opens the door to what we can do and how we connect with our readers, you know?
Yeah, I definitely feel that. I still remember the books that taught me how to read.
What was one of them? What was one of those books?
Davy Jones was what I read aloud to learn how to read, because I kind of struggled at the beginning. So yeah, Davy Jones, like the Boxcar Kids,
The Boxcar Kids,
the Babysitter's Club, all of those. I still have them. They're still my favorites. Yeah. So our next question is: once you've published one book, is it easier to move toward writing for a different age demographic or genre? What are those conversations like with your agent, editor, or yourself? Is it easy to write for different demographics?
I don't know. I mean, like for me with this one, I think I was really lucky when I was speaking with my agent, my editor at Scholastic, and both he and the rest of the team were very open to me going into other age groups. But what they did have to do, because I published 3 YA books before that, so they had to effectively launch me as a debut, as a picture book author, and then as a middle grade author. And I think if there's a team at the publishing house that will support that and make that happen, then that's fantastic. But I think it's not necessarily for everybody an automatic thing by any means, you know, and it does require a certain level, I think, of investment from them to kind of make that happen and to make it all work out. So I think, like, for me, it was just a question of kind of discussing the ideas, and my editor really kind of fighting my corner with the team and suggesting that it would be a good idea, really, and them luckily backing it all up. So that's kind of how it worked for me. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily an easy process for anybody. I think it's I think you have to kind of prove yourself in those different age groups.
Yeah, it sounds like. And Simon, let me know if this is kind of what you're saying too, but it sounds like people want to put writers into these boxes of,
yeah,
you're a young adult. So if you're writing another young adult, we can understand that. But if you're writing something else, that's kind of like this wilderness to us, and we're not sure how you'll fare on the path.
Right.
I get that. I get those vibes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've seen those vibes. I haven't gotten them, but I'm kind of early on in my writer path. So that's interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think it's like this idea of, well, how are we going to market you? Because suddenly, you know, we've got to market you to parents or 6-year-olds, but also to teenagers or to 10-year-olds. And I think, you know, it's all different approaches, isn't it? I think so. I think it requires a certain amount of quite flexible thinking from marketing and sales and how they're going to position you. So I understand that it's tricky for them, I think, to get their heads around it maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I mean, it's an interesting experience, because I think I had those concerns coming in to shifting out of YA and then into picture book. But I was really passionate. I mean, the first picture book that's coming out next year is Lupe Lopez, Rockstar Rules, which is about, ironically enough, a kid who has a problem with authority, which has nothing to do with me, but absolutely has everything to do with me. I wanted to be a drummer as a kid and got in trouble at school and got, you know, so, but I was really passionate about it. And basically I have this really great friend named Pat Miller. She's a picture book author. And I said, hey, listen, you should totally co-write this with me. And she's like, I don't co-write with people. And I said, you totally need to. And I totally got her to do this thing. And then together, you know, I grew a lot as a writer then, because I'm working with someone who's established as a picture book writer and who's very seasoned. And so, I dove in. And so I think it's interesting, because I just took it to my agent. I said, we want to write this book. This is the book we wrote. And this is what we're thinking. And my agent's like, I never thought you'd write a picture book. And then, but we moved forward, and then it sold. And I'm like, what is this magic? You know, again, unicorns from the sky. It's like, it's all unicorns, right? But I hear what you're saying about how do you market that, because, you know, different publishers have different rules, and it's Scholastic, for instance. I think there are certain rules about if you're published in YA, then you need to have a different name to publish middle grade and younger, I think, or some. There's like all of these sort of rules sometimes that exist, but there are definitely conversations. At the end of the day, though, I think the stories are really solid, at least in the U.S. I'm only speaking for the U.S. I don't want to
Sure.
say absolutely nothing. But in the U.S., if the stories are solid and the team is solid, and because 2 of my picture books will continue with Candlewick, is where I published the Fat Angie series, but 2 of the other picture books I sold in January will be at Philomel, and so completely different place. But again, it's just I think it's just been interesting for me. I thought it was going to be. I just thought it was going to work, but I didn't know how. I was just going to will it into the universe somehow. And when it keeps working, there's excitement. And then I know there's going to be that point where there's going to be a stop sign, and I'm going to have to grow in a different direction. But yeah, but it's interesting to hear, your experience there, Simon. Compared to the experience here that I've had.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with them has been very positive. I just see that happening perhaps with other authors a little bit, and some of the conversations that they have, and how tricky it can be sometimes. I think it just depends on what kind of willingness is there,
Totally, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, when I had my first conversation with my agent, I was like super excited. I was like, oh, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? And I don't know. I think it depends on like your sort of relationship. I mean, first thing she said was calm down and just do what you're doing now. And then cause I was like, I want to do YA at some point. And she's like, yeah, we'll get there. So it all depends. But as Eric said, like I'm still very early in my path, and I have couple of new adult to go through first, but I would love to move on to full YA at some point.
I think, Michael, you kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but many writers who aren't published don't think about building an author brand, but that's a question they face once they're published. So what is your brand as an author, and what does that look like when you're writing across demographics?
Right. My brand. I think it's important for every author to sort of have certain things that sort of are specifically you, and that people can find in each one of your works. I think for me, it's as I said, I'm not a huge like coming out person, but I think I want to have queer people, and I want them to have lots of issues, and I think mental health is a huge thing for me, and I try to like put that in everything. And I think I love themes of found family and friendship. I will always go to those first before a romantic relationship, and that's just something that I'm always going to do in each of my works.
I'm with Michael on that. You just said like the found family part is a really big part of my writing, but it's also been a part of my life growing up. And so I think there are part of that overlaps. And, brand is interesting, right? Because then what happens when you want to expand beyond that, right? Like I've written a series that most people know me from, which is, like I said, the Fat Angie series. And it's about mental health. It's about body image. It's about female empowerment. It's about queerness, right? And those things will still continue in my work, but I'm not, but I'm done with that series. Like I'm ready to move into other things that I want to write about, because I did write things before that. And so, but I can see where it continues in the picture book writing, which is still about female empowerment. It's still about diversity in culture and in class. And so there are things that I can see that continue to move forward that are still part of that. But the brand, what happens when you start to shift it a little? You know what I mean? And what does that look like? I mean, it's like my new headshot was me in a leather jacket. And I'm like, how's that going to play in kindergarten? I don't know. We'll see. I don't know. But, I just was like, okay, we'll see what happens. And we'll go with that. But, it's a lot to kind of take in. I'm really curious to know what Simon and Eric think about the issue of brand and how other brands themselves.
Oh
Well,
my
no, I agree with you, Ian. I mean, the thing is, this brand is fine, but yet what happens when you do want to,
Right.
move into something a little bit different? It can be a bit of an issue. I mean, my things is always so far as being kind of funny, upbeat, joyous kind of books, especially with the with the YA and the middle grade, and that really came out for me of really just simply wanting to see more books with gay kids having a great time in them, basically, and that was really important to me, which is why I kind of went down that road. And I just think the world in general needs more laughter in it, so I wanted to sort of put more of that into the world, basically. And that's true of the kind of the middle grade as well, and the picture books have that sort of energy too. But yeah, there is part of me that like one day might want to write a murder mystery. I really love that kind of stuff, or a thriller, or something like that. And I'm just not sure. I'm not sure how that would work. Really, it's kind of tricky, isn't it? Because people know you for one thing. They pre-order your next book because they loved the last one. I don't know. I simply don't know how far they'll go with you on that journey when you start mixing it up, and maybe they will, and hopefully people would do that. But yeah, it's a bit of an unknown, isn't it? If you start straying from the known brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with what everyone is saying, and I heard recently there's this phrase like the triple threat, but people are using it. Have you heard this? Like they're using it about authors, like, oh, an author can write picture book, middle grade, and young adult. They're the triple threat.
Oh, I've not heard that. I love it.
Yeah, it just started to bubble up recently, and I'm kind of just like clinging onto that because to what we're saying, there's a nice freedom and flexibility about being able to infuse yourself. Like we all have many different facets and sides to ourselves. We're not one-dimensional, so our interests vary. So I might want to write something joyful, uplifting, inspiring, but I also may want to write something really dark and like Eric wrote this and like surprise people. but it's like, I don't know. The brand thing is really interesting, especially with TikTok and social media, where I tell myself all I can be is myself.
Yep.
And that's it. Take it or leave it. My books are written by me, so I'm in there somewhere. We all are in our works, to some degree. So that's kind of where I sit on it. It's more just loosey goosey. Yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that like professionally, I'm a historian, so I'm over here reviewing books about the civil rights movement, but the next day I'm reading magical middle grade. So it's just
yes.
Like,
that's your brand.
Yeah.
That's my brand. Yeah. So let's talk more specifically about the craft of writing. So it takes a lot of skill to write for any one of these genres you all write for, and different age demographics require different skill sets. So what are the basic tenets of storytelling when you're writing picture books, and how is that different from the older demographics like middle grade, YA, and adult?
I think E put it really well earlier. When it comes to picture book writing, every word counts.
Yeah.
You have to be so concise, and it's really,
yeah.
I mean, 750 words is a lot now, in a picture book. And I mean, that's when I'm working with Pat, like she has disciplined me so well. Like I'll have like 769. She goes, we could cut at least 9 of those words. I'm like, really? Like I really like those 9 words. And, like I'm holding on for dear life. Sometimes she's most different. But yeah, no, I think you have to be so concise and so specific. And it's not even that, though. It's not just about word count, though. I mean, the story has to be there. I mean, think about it. I mean, think about Eric totally had me with his picture book. I'm like, because we've heard that joke our whole lives, right? And now it's like he's taking it, put a totally different spin on it. And I'm like, I need to read this book now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's just.
And then I love that it's coded. That there's code in there. It's coded. Like I love it. So anyway.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like I saw a few cover options, and Candlewick showed this rainbow title because I was having great conversations with them about how having any sort of queer coding in it was really important to me as the author, and they totally heard that, and this rainbow title treatment that they ended up with really meant a lot. But yeah, I totally agree with that it's about the story, and a lot of people do talk about word count a lot. For instance, like, young adult has to be 75,000 words, and some people say longer and shorter. And I think for me, the word count is almost irrelevant. It's just how many words does it take to tell the story. So it's that's kind of how I view it.
I think as well with picture books, I always remember that it's very much a collaboration with the illustrator, and that those pictures can do and should do a lot of the storytelling and character building as well as your words. And I think that's the other thing to really remember with picture books in particular, is that you're not doing it alone like you basically are with a YA. You have got this fantastic other person there who is contributing just as much to the story and the book as you are. So I think that's a good thing to remember too.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. I think the approach to the story itself, I don't find it that much different from any other sort of age demographic. You sort of still want to have your objective, obstacle, an outcome.
Exactly.
But with picture books, you just don't have subplots or anything like that. So you have to keep the story concise and make sure that your intended audience is captured all the way through. And I think this is where it gets a little bit more technical with picture books. Like, you want to make sure that every word is understood. And if you do have a slightly more difficult word, as Simon said, this is it's collaboration. So you can sort of rely on the image to do the talking for you. So if there is one single word that is, slightly more difficult, the image should give that idea. If you have more than one, then you're probably losing the child's attention, and that's what you should really make a little bit more simpler.
So I had a question for everybody, if it's okay, really quickly. Is so in talking about picture books, if we did everyone here? We basically all started in novels of some kind, right? Middle grade or YA, is that correct? So then, no, not for everyone.
Adult.
Okay, and of course, yeah. So that transition though into picture books then. So were you studying other books? Were you looking at other readers? Like, what was part of that process? I think, when writers come to this and they're very kind of new, they're like, well, how did you transition? Like, how did you know to do what you did? Yeah, that wasn't on the list. I just totally sprung that on everyone.
Yeah. For me, I had a bunch of manuscripts that were middle grade, young adult, but I did have this one picture book manuscript at the time, and I wrote it just for fun. Like, it tickled me. Do you know what I mean? Like, it tickled me, and I was just like, this is so clever, and I was kind of like, having fun with it. And when I joined up with my agent, I sent him a lot of my samples of my work, and I said, which one do you want to go out with first? And he said, the picture book. And it really just was a pleasant surprise, because that was like the fun manuscript that I wasn't really thinking about going out with, above everything else. So I kind of fell into picture books that way. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question, E, but
I was just curious.
Yeah, I just started writing it for fun. And there are so many picture books that I actually love and have bought over the years. And I never made the connection that I could write one myself. I just always loved buying them.
I mean, I literally, to go from writing novels to picture book, I'd written poetry my whole life, but still to look at the structure of a picture book, right? Is it plot based, right? Or is it more poetic? And so really it required me to pull books and study them, like study the format, to learn it the way I would learn anything else. And So I know for me that I don't know if that was part of your experience though, anyone else. And so that was part of my experience, was pulling 20 books I was told I had to read and understand, and then approach it then with a sense of the structure, because it is so much more compressed, you know, and looking at it that way. So I was just curious if anyone else had that or similar experience.
Yeah, I was fairly similar to that actually, because I got a whole stack of picture books and other picture book manuscripts sent to me, and I looked through them all, and like you, I studied them and I sort of picked them apart, and I had to really go back to basics in terms of learning the craft of how to put one together, basically, for sure, because it was completely new territory, and to be honest, not something I'd looked at for years and years since I was, a kid. So yeah,
definitely lots of research and looking at what's out there, and there's 1,000 formats as well, so even that.
Yeah, it's all about that page turn too, like
exactly
thinking about the energy shifts from spread to spread. Can I ask an off the book question too? Is that okay?
Totally.
Okay, so where do y'all stand with art notes when it comes to picture book writing? Are you super specific? Are you really vague? Or do you fall somewhere in between?
I'm somewhere in between. I'll be quite specific if it's absolutely crucial to the understanding of it. But generally, I leave pretty much most of it out and just see what they come up with. And Gary Parsons, who I've worked with on these 2 picture books so far, I've known him quite well now, so we've kind of fallen into quite a good sort of shorthand way of working, and I think he kind of knows what's in my head, and I sort of know the sort of thing that he will come up with, so it kind of works quite well. But yeah, I would keep it really general stroke vague generally in mind.
And Eric, you've worked with Candlewick, so it's a very open experience working with Candlewick Press, and that they're very receptive to hearing your ideas. I'd say in that experience, my art notes are specific if it's culturally necessary. So Lupe Lopez is set in Texas, but it's also set in a specific kind of region, and where predominantly Mexican American kids go. And also, if I'm concerned that there's a centering of whiteness, like to make young Mexican kids all look white, then that's a conversation I need to have. Because, a lot of the kids I grew up with, they didn't all look like me, And so to explore the what's relevant. So I think in an art note, it would be more, for me, if I thought it was like a real cultural standpoint, or I can't think of anything right now off the top of my head about queerness that would be important. Right, because I think that usually kind of works out. But for me, it's more of a cultural issue, I think, is what I look at in art note a lot of the time, is this truthful to the culture? And so that's when, but it's really the artist's world. But if it's important, I will say something, and then it's up to the publisher to decide, have we hit the mark or not,
Completely different, extremely specific, just because I'm such a nerd and I love character design. And for me, my picture book was a one-off. I may do more, but I really wanted to have this vision made exactly as I wanted it. So I think very specific.
And then I guess now to switch towards the other ages. So I'm curious about the line between middle grade and YA when crafting these stories. So what do you think separates YA from middle grade?
Language. How far you can go. I mean, that's the first thoughts. I don't know. What does everybody think?
Yeah, I think it's a good first thought. I mean, my YA's got a lot of swearing in it, so I can't do that in the middle grade. I guess as well, sort of general content of the plot and in terms of what the characters are going through. Obviously, I suppose it's fairly obvious to say it, but my YA stuff has a lot. There's a heavy romance angle to it, of people working out and who likes who and getting together and that type of thing, and that doesn't feature in my middle grade, which is much more based around friendship. Although obviously some middle grade does kind of deal with maybe the first beginnings of that kind of thing. So I think it really depends, I suppose, how you handle it, I suppose, with the different age groups, maybe, for me.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback and say I view it as just the age of the characters. Mm-hmm. So the content, what's going on in their life, when you're in middle school, you can see some, dark things or some upsetting things or some harmful things, just the same way that young adults can. A lot of people view the two demographics as what's appropriate or not. And that always makes my head hurt because we all have different experiences and life is life. And when we're in middle school versus high school, just anything could happen. So for me, I just keep it about the age of the character in terms of where it lands, middle grade versus young adult.
Mm.
And then the content-wise, though, I think what Eric is saying is really interesting too, because there can be you could be 11 or 12, and your experience can be a lot darker than maybe the next 11 or 12-year-old, or it could be a lot lighter. And so I think it really depends on the narrative too, right? But I think what I've seen in publishing is predominantly is the stop point becomes about how much language, like how many curse words can I put into a middle grade versus a YA. And if I do put them in a middle grade, I better have a really solid reasoning for doing it, And I mean, so, but yeah, I think I'm with you. That totally makes sense for both of you, actually. Yeah.
I think in the industry too, just to piggyback off of what you're saying, E, I feel like there is this like rainbow ceiling or like fence that's like, if it's gay, it can be young adult, but if it's middle grade,
right,
that's considered content.
Exactly.
And therefore inappropriate. I think it's getting a lot better now. I'm seeing a lot more queer middle grade, which is really inspiring and hopeful, but it wasn't always the case. So I feel like swear words and language, I feel like sexuality, sexual orientation is a thing. Maybe drugs, maybe that's another thing that is usually shifted toward YA, but it's just interesting. I feel like it's subjective, right?
I think the whole issue of content is so fascinating because when I often go into schools and do visits, and often my YA books are loved and picked up by kind of 11 and 12-year-olds who typically might be pushed more towards middle grade, but they want the kind of content that's in the YA. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of them are getting that content online anyway, watching YouTube or Netflix. The type of shows they're watching tend to be more geared towards a kind of a young adult book than a middle grade one. Mm-hmm. And so actually what happens is a lot of those younger kids are kind of being put off books sometimes because they're not being allowed to read or kind of have books that would appeal to them, promoted to them for that reason. So it's really tough. And at the same time, I don't know about you guys, but over here, there's always this issue of, a parent's going to complain if a book with this kind of content is in the school library, that type of thing, We're just waiting for a parent to go off to the newspaper and complain about whatever it happens to be, and everyone's in trouble. So it's a really, really hard balancing act, I think.
I mean, and I think you're really onto something here. The parent issue is a really good one, and I do have a lot of younger readers that want to read my books, the YA books, and I've had some soft censorship, is what they call it, soft censorship. But it's the fear. Like I always tell the kids when they come in, I'm like, if you came in straight, you'll leave straight. Like it's how I feel about the book. Like if they came in straight and read it, they'll leave straight. I don't think there's some magical thing in my books that are going to turn them queer. And there is some of that fear. Now, this is not, I'm not saying all of America, but I'm just saying there are pockets where I've been and where I've had to kind of deal with that. And the Stonewall Award is a beautiful thing to win, but it's right on my book. And then as beautiful and as many opportunities as given me, it also gives people an opportunity to also take that book and kind of put it somewhere else, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, it's not in good anymore. It's now been, or it might get discarded a lot easier. And so, but I would never say that I'm not proud to have that on my book. I mean, I'm honored. But I'm also aware that, for every, beautiful thing that comes from that, there are those out there who are still trying to create, trying to maintain, sort of a heteronormative raising of young people and in kind of keep away stories that validate maybe not their experience, but maybe their friends or their uncles or their aunts, right? Because we're surrounded by people who are celebrating life that isn't just a heteronormative experience, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are queer people in the world.
That's awesome too.
So if parents are upset that their child knows that, what can you do?
I mean, right. Exactly. But, I just think about, like, I grew up in a little town of 5,000 people in South Texas, okay? It was a book desert, right? And, I think Annie on My Mind might have been published at that point, but it was never going to be in our library. There was no queerness, and so I think about that. And so when I became an adult and I published these books, and then I realized my own hometown doesn't carry my books still in the library. And I thought, okay, so there's a battle I haven't won yet, but I tell you what, I'll go and I'll put them in every other library and get them in.
Yeah, too right as well.
Yeah.
Here in the UK, between 1988 and 2003, there was this piece of legislation that effectively banned LGBT books from all school libraries. Couldn't have them at all. It was called Section 28. It was terrible, and they said it wouldn't be stopped. Only after 2003 did the whole LGBT market in children's books even become slightly viable. Because before then, you wouldn't be able to get them into schools or public libraries. They considered it inappropriate. And obviously the legacy of that doesn't just die off when they scrapped the legislation in 2003. It echoes down the years ever since. And it was such a terrible, harmful, awful act they put in place.
Does that sound like maybe that's your new book, Section 28?
I know, right? It's something that.
I mean, I can already see the cover, so I'm totally in. Yeah. I need you to write it now.
Yeah, I know. It's quite a story.
Yeah.
But, I was at school during that whole time, in the 90s. So I grew up with nothing at all in the library. It was just completely ignored, just not allowed in. So, and there were people, of course, that would gladly have that back today,
Oh,
so.
Sure. Yeah. What about everyone else? Did you have, I'm sorry, Eric, I didn't interrupt you.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that it's the term inappropriate. It's something that like makes my head want to pop, because if there is a boy and a girl kissing in a middle grade novel, it's no big deal to the parents who are complaining that if it was a same-sex kiss. If things are equal in terms of what the characters are doing between straight and gay, then why is one inappropriate and the other isn't? I feel like the parents and people who are complaining about it, their mind is in the gutter, because no one else is thinking what they're thinking about when they see that innocent little moment.
Right.
So that's just that for that. But E, what were you going to say?
I was just going to ask everyone, Michael, I'd love to know this for you as well. Is like, I love that you're writing about mental health, right, and family and all of this, and when you were growing up, did you have access to books that represented who you were in the world? For all of you?
No. No, not really. I mean, simple answer, no. But I grew up in Italy, actually.
Okay.
Cool.
So sort of like a very Catholic country, but my family wasn't at all. So I didn't grow up with those sort of like religious teachings at all. Like I was always, it didn't matter what the outside world, because once I got into my house, I was free to be whoever I wanted to be. And I wasn't really sure about my sexuality until maybe 17, 18, when I started traveling. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I remember growing up, if there were gay books, they were in like the teeny tiny, like self-help, like queer section of the bookstore. And it's just so great to see that now there are readers reading queer stories and queer writers, and there is so much more space and so much more of a an accepting and an openness of queer stories, I think back to that one little aisle, and those books, I don't even know what they were. It was like how to, be okay being gay, which is important, but that I'm like, where's the young adult? Where's the middle grade? Where's the picture book? It almost, in my mind, my memory didn't exist. And it's just so great that it feels like that time has come. I used to be like nervous that being a queer writer, I would have to hide my queerness in order to make it. And that was a real concern of mine for a long time. Even writing stories at the time that had straight characters and stories that felt really inauthentic to me, just in the hopes of becoming an author one day. So it's really, really nice that it feels like that time has come for us to kind of get out there and share our stories and let our voices be heard, because I'm just thinking back in the day, someone once said that someone would be lucky if they wrote something gay and a teeny tiny gay periodical might pick it up, but it was niche. Yeah. That was the rhetoric back then. I don't know if this is hitting a chord with any of you guys, but that's just kind of how it felt for me.
No, for sure, Eric. When we, thank goodness we've come some way since then. But yeah, totally, it was absolutely like that over here as well for a very long time.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, like, for me, I know there were no Black characters in books, let alone queer characters. So there was none of those intersections, and I was growing up. I didn't read a book like that until I was probably 20. So yeah, I'm glad that
I'm with you. There was nothing, right? I mean, there really wasn't. I mean, think about it. Can you think, Maya, of anything when you were a teenager that I know you said, here's some of my favorite books like Babysitter's Club and all this, but were they your story? Did they belong to you? Was it your story? And that's the thing.
The only place you got Black characters were if it was a story based on slavery, or if it was a story on Christianity. There was really no in between, and I didn't get that until I was an adult. So, yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah, speaking of adult, Michael, you're the lone adult fiction author here and have the unique experience of writing a picture book based on the one that appears in your adult novel. How did that come about, and what was it like to switch gears from adult fiction to a picture book?
Well, the picture book actually happens for plot reasons. So my adult novel follows this guy who's a mess, and he is an aspiring author, and he goes through a series of adventures throughout the book. And just like I did in real life, at some point he sits down and tries to write through his depression. Now this was a problem while I was writing it, because I couldn't have him write the same thing that I was writing, because I had already talked about it. Like, I couldn't have him in chapter 20 starting to write, the things that happened in chapter 1. So I was kind of in a pickle, because I didn't know how to show that. And I didn't want to do it off page, because I didn't want the reader to think that, Leo couldn't write and maybe it was all in his head. So I went for a different direction, and I thought, what about a children's book? I can sort of summarize the story, have the same themes, but put it in a much lighter light and have this message across. And that did two things, because obviously I created this little world which was magical and colorful and, for children to understand, but it was also a good way within the adult novel for the reader to really understand what was going on in the novel. The mental health aspect, the bipolar, all happens in the background. You're sort of dragged along in this journey, and you realize things are wrong and he's acting in weird ways, but you can't really point your finger at it. But at that time, that's like a clear message of how bipolar works and what it feels like to be in the middle of a manic episode. So that's kind of how it came about. And then a lot of reviews mentioned how people resonated with the story, and after that I was like, oh, let's do images, and got really excited from there.
Great. Well, I have one final question. So it is, what is your favorite demographic to write for and why?
So it's a trick question.
Oh gosh, yeah.
It's difficult. This is a difficult question.
I mean, that's like going to your mom, and if you have siblings, saying which is your favorite.
Yeah.
You know, right then your mom says, "Ay, mija, you're my favorite," but you know, really and truly, it's totally, you know, your brother. So, but and I don't. There's not a favorite. For me, it's more of an excitement for each of them, and the things that I can appreciate about each one of them and how they can resonate with readers. And I think the excitement of knowing how different aged readers are going to experience them. But I will say, and I think Eric and everyone will agree, I don't know, is that in writing for picture book, anyone who thinks that is an easy task, it is not an easy task. It's a beautiful task, and when it works, it is magic. And that's what I love about it, is the magic of it. So I'd say I have a special respect for picture book writing, but I couldn't. I mean, they're all my children. I must love them all equally, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to answer the question in like a trick answer way, because it is such a hard question. I like to write, in terms of the process, picture books, because like you were saying, to me, it feels like solving a puzzle. You only have a few pieces, so you could swap them around, swap the pages, do this whole game, and then when everything kind of locks into place, you're like, that was magic. For me, the middle grade and young adult, it's a different writing experience. I'm like plugged into my desk here, like basically fettered at the desk, you know, snacks. Like I'm just sitting for hours and hours and hours. Go, 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 go. The sun is setting day after day. That word count is not gonna, you know, write itself. And so in terms of the process, I like the playfulness of picture book writing over the other two.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it, actually, Eric. I like that puzzle aspect of picture books is really appealing. I share that totally. I know exactly what you mean. It is a real joy, actually, if you manage to kind of solve it or nearly solve it. It's great. It's a real sense of satisfaction. I think you were absolutely going to push me and say you can only write this one thing from now on. I probably would say middle grade, to be honest, and that's because I love the fact I can push the humour a bit more in middle grade. I feel a bit more free with being able to be a bit more silly and a bit more slapstick. And because in essence, my sense of humour is that of a 10-year-old boy, it suits me quite well to write it. So I would probably say middle grade for that reason.
I think for me, as much as I loved doing the picture book, I think I really, really enjoyed the freedom of new adult, just because I can do literally whatever I want. I can say gross things, I can say funny things, you know, I could put a funny scene that's really stupid, but I could kill someone. You know, there's so many options, and I think I really enjoy the freedom of that.
I mean, murder. I mean, really, why not, right? I mean,
yes.
Exactly.
I'm like, did you read the Hunger Games? They killed a lot of people in the Hunger Games. It's a bloodbath.
In a gruesome way.
Don't give up on YA completely then.
No.
Great. Well, thank you so much to Simon, E., Eric, Michael, for this incredible conversation. Where can readers find more information about you and your work?
Well, I have a website, simonjamesgreen.com, or I'm on Twitter at simonjamesgreen and Instagram as well. So you can find out about all my books there, I guess.
And then you can find me on ericduran.com and also at my handle on social media at ericduran. And my picture book, Poultrygeist, comes out August 17th. Pre-orders are online now. Just gotta plug that.
Okay, I'll go. You can find me online at bigdreamswrite.com, and on social media, it is not my name like everyone else, so it's at Pinata Director. Yes, Pinata, like the thing you hit. Director, yes. You can find me on Instagram or wherever with that handle. And I have there's an anthology I'm in that's coming out in August that I am now totally spacing on, just because I had to say that out loud. That I will then figure out later. And then I have Fat Angie Homecoming comes out in November, and Lupe Lopez, Rockstar Rules, comes out in the spring of 2022. So I am super excited about all of those things.
Cool. I'm most active on Instagram at Michael Saris, same handle for Twitter. And you can also find me on Goodreads. And my audiobook for All of My Friends Are Rich comes out next month.
Cool. I'm Maya, and thank you for joining us at Pride Book Fest 2021.